Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
It's Ron Crabtree here, your host of MetaPod. And here we talk about, those three common challenges organizations face, particularly involved with tangible goods, the forever labor shortage, the challenge to digitization, digital transformation, and just flat needing to do more with less. And one of the things that's really out there recently that'll be in everybody's minds is, the incoming Trump administration with the trifecta of Republican control of the U.S. government. And, all these pending changes are going to impact tariffs and compliance requirements for anybody that buys and uses stuff coming in from overseas. They have a big impact on future sourcing, offshoring, nearshoring. Do we do it? Do we not? How do we do that? And it ties back to, these unfunded mandates in many cases are adding layers of additional work and additional costs. It's putting tons of pressure on organizations. So the topic of this particular episode is really going to be around the Trump tariffs and what to expect and how to plan. And with us today is Karen King. And she's going to share some crucial diagnostics with us, some three generic areas if we're importing or if we have facilities operating overseas that we need to import things back into North America, things we should be concerned about. And then she's going to offer some recommendations and some approaches to how do we solve for those sorts of challenges. And I've known Karen for quite a while, and she's the first person I call when a customer or I have a concern, like, okay, so what does that mean? And how would that impact us in terms of our sourcing and additional cost and constraints and requirements we have to jump through hoops to do? And so she's really on my speed dial when I want to talk about tariffs and anything related to, bringing stuff into North America. So Karen, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. I'm Karen King with Frontera Global Advisory. I am a licensed customs broker, and I have about 20 years of experience in the international trade consulting space. So I help global companies build and enhance their trade compliance department. So we're talking about any company that brings a good into the U.S. or sends it out of the U.S.
So essentially, both directions, in and out. Oh, yeah. Okay, good.
Importing and exporting. When we're talking about tariffs and customs duties, that's really on the importing side. Exporting side, we're talking about compliance. So really, I focus on three buckets. One, as I mentioned, compliance. How do companies follow the rules and regulations? Two, strategy. How do we save money in duties? And how do we save time? How do we make that more efficient? Or ideally both. And then finally, data analytics. So how do we look at data to understand what's happening, trends, think about predicting the future, and just generally helping to run the trade operations of your business.
All right. So I hope I don't trip you up here with this question, because you said something that made me think carefully. I was kind of going at this from the bringing stuff in, but there's likely and very likely to be tons of retaliatory activities going on around the world of countries and companies trying to get even with us, if you will, right? And imposing their own requirements and restrictions if we want to export to other countries. So you're going to cover both sides of that. That's awesome. So why don't we jump right to it then? Share with us like three different areas that generically you better be evaluating, digging into, a bit of a diagnostic to help our audience understand, is this a threat or an opportunity? And how big would that be? And how would we know if we need to do something?
Absolutely. And you made a good point, Ron, because every import is an export and vice versa. Every export is an import. So we need to be looking at both sides of that equation. And I'll definitely dig into that a little bit more. But in terms of diagnostics, so the first thing you want to do is understand right now if your company is equipped from a personnel standpoint to handle the major changes to trade policy that are coming our way. I know it's in the news daily, if not hourly, about these tariffs and changes to imports that are coming in the U.S. with this new administration. So you want to get very clear. First of all, does your company have a trade compliance department or a designated employee? If not, how does your company handle these types of matters? It's very interesting. In all of my experience, the trade compliance department can fall into many different categories: supply chain, operations, tax, legal. So sometimes it's even hard to find where that function sits within a company because it can really vary and it touches so many different pieces of the company. Second, you really want to be clear if the trade compliance folks at your company have a seat at the table. So oftentimes this function can be overlooked. It may be viewed as more of just compliance or folks that are going to slow down your supply chain versus being an enabler to your supply chain. But right now, it will be very crucial for them to have a seat at the table when you're making these strategic decisions.
I'd like to ask a question there, if I may. And in your experiences as you work with organizations, a seat at the table can mean a lot of things, right? It can
Yep.
be very early stages you're developing future products and services and and the decisions we're making in actually developing a product. And when engineering goes out and starts finding suppliers in the development cycle, I'm imagining when you talk about being a seat at the table, it's for the life cycle of products, right? At the beginning of the whole development cycle, and then as things change, and then you bring it to market, and then if you're going into markets, a seat at the table with the folks that are working on sales and marketing and where the growth of this business is going to come, you're talking about a seat at the table at a very strategic top level in your organization,
Yes.
and pulling this in as a crucial consideration, just as important as developing the product or service, is how's that going to impact the supply network, both the inbound and the outbound and fulfillment on the back end. So that's what you mean. I think that's what you mean. Having a seat at the
Absolutely. Yeah.
table.
Yes. Strategic decisions. And like you said, as far upstream as possible, because when these engineers are thinking about where they're going to manufacture these components and raw materials, we need to think about duty and tariff implications all the way upstream. And what I've seen in my career is when trade compliance is brought in at the very end, that's when scrambling happens because manufacturing's been set, the contracts are in place, things are in motion. And that's where you don't want to be caught flat footed when the good actually crosses the border and everyone kind of has this moment like, oh gosh, like that small profit margin we thought we were going to have on this product just got completely eaten by that 6% tariff that we hadn't put in our planning way upstream to be thinking about. And then there's nothing we can do about it. We have to pay it.
Yeah, that correlates to, design for manufacturability. And a lot of organizations, once you throw it into manufacturing, you expect them to start making it better. Wait a minute, you designed in all the costs, all the limitations, all the problems. It's too late to fix cost problems after it's actually launched. So this is related to that. You've got to integrate that very carefully and
Absolutely.
have these trade and compliance, both sides of that, right? The inbound and the outbound
Absolutely.
involved at the
Yep.
right time. So that's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And also, it helps move the goods faster. If we're involved at the engineering stage, we can understand what the tariff classification of the good is. And once it hits the border, it crosses smoothly. It's not going to get stuck at the border and a phone call comes to the company and they say, what is this? Where is it from? That's going to slow it down. And as we know in manufacturing supply chain, time is money. One extra day is a lot of money. So great point. And finally, just thinking about personnel, you want to know if you have anyone responsible at your company. If you don't have someone, do you have a third-party expert like an attorney or a consultant that you can call with these types of questions as well?
All right. So if I'm sitting on the board of directors or an advisor for a company, I'm going to walk down the hall and say, okay, so who is this?
Yeah.
Who's our trade compliance expert? Okay. Show me the evidence that we've actually integrated that in our product design and consider that in our supply chain network with the inbound. And then show me the evidence we've actually thought this through carefully in the markets we're going to serve or where we're going to ship products and services in the future. Show me that you've done that. And if they can't, that's where you're going to give us some advice here in a little bit. Let's go to your next diagnostic.
Yes. So the next one is so the first, personnel, second, global supply chain visibility. Do you have a good understanding of current state? So a lot of these diagnostics are just getting a baseline. Let's understand what current state is before we can do anything about it. So where are you purchasing from abroad. This may sound very simple, and folks may immediately say, oh, I know what our supply chain is. But once you start to peel back that onion, it actually can be quite complex. You may be buying from a distributor in one country who's actually, buying from a supplier, who's buying from a manufacturer, who's buying from raw material manufacturers and suppliers way back. So do you know the physical flow of your supply chain, both into the US and, like you said, out? Where are we going to outbound from the US? And do you know the country of origin of goods? So the country of origin of a product determines the duty rate along with the type of product it is. So that is where the product is manufactured, not where it's sold from, not where it's exported from. Where is the item manufactured? And for complex supply chains where you might have manufacturing in different countries, that's where you need to do the analysis to understand what that final manufacturing location is.
So I got to jump in for just a second. Simone Ross was a guest on my podcast, and she has a ton of background in the garment manufacturing industries. And from an environmental safety and governance perspective, there's huge issues, associated with child labor and things like that. And, and are we resourcing responsibly? What you're opening up here is you got to go well beyond that, because as a company, you could be liable from a compliance perspective for multiple layers in the inbound supply chain. Is that true?
You're not responsible for multiple layers.
At least you could be, or you could be castigated at least.
Yeah, you really need to know where it's considered to be manufactured, because if it's China or if it's, a different country, that's going to have a major impact on what the tariff will be, because it's based on the country of origin, country of manufacturing. The slave labor issue also is huge. That's like a whole other podcast. And U.S. Customs is really cracking down on that and has enforced a lot of new requirements over the last few years to make sure that U.S. importers are not bringing in goods from any regions that have been designated as having forced labor.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting you, but it just kind of got me thinking.
Yeah, no, these are all great points. And then finally, just about the global supply chain visibility, is it documented? Do you have that right in front of you so you can understand where goods are coming from physically and where they're going?
So from an advisor perspective, again, I'm walking down the hall to the supply chain group in this case saying, okay, so show me the documentation that demonstrates we really got to handle all this country of origin stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And to some extent, you're also walking down the sales and marketing. Show me the evidence that we've thought through where we're sending our stuff, because it goes both ways, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. What's that third area you think we should be looking at carefully?
So this next area is to really understand the duty that you're paying. So we hear tariffs in the news. That's the same thing as a customs duty. This is a tax that's paid on a good that's imported across a border. So do you know the products in your supply chain that are currently subject to tariffs and duties? And what is that rate? Is it 1%? Is it 5%? Is it 0%? We want to get this baseline, because everything we're hearing from this new administration is that these tariffs that will be imposed will be in addition to what's currently already imposed. So let's just take an example. We have a $100 product coming in from China, okay? It's subject to a 5% duty rate. That's $5 in duties. The tariffs that were imposed in 2018 by the first Trump administration imposed 25% additional duties on many products coming from China. Okay, so now we're up to 30%, because that's 25% in addition on top of the 5. So now we're up to 30.
Yeah, let me ask a question there. I'm going to admit to a little naivete and not really understanding the subtleties of duties versus tariffs. And if I understood what you said, and I'd like to be really clear about this for the audience, duties are the normal stuff that's imposed that we already kind of knew about, and then tariffs is special in addition to.
They're actually interchangeable words. Duties or tariffs.
Okay, I just want to see if there was a slight difference.
No. In the news, you mostly hear the word tariffs for some reason. In my world, we mostly hear customs duties. Same thing. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you. I was a little confused for a second.
Yeah, they are indirect taxes. So they're not taxes on your income, but they are taxes that we pay indirectly on goods and services.
Thank you.
So now let's think about coming up into 2025. We have the $100 product coming in. We have a 30% duty rate right now on it, the 5 and the 25%. And now we're talking about currently 10% more. That's the number that's kind of batted around for China right now. So we're actually talking about a 40% duty rate on a $100 product. So the simple math, $40. That is a huge percentage to be paying. And we've been hearing in the news 10 to 60% on goods from China. So we really want to know where we're starting from right now in order to even figure out what things could possibly look like in the future when we're doing those strategy sessions.
That's interesting. It's probably off topic. Do you advise companies when they need to be working on their agreements with their customers in terms of protecting them from the unknown changes coming down the pipeline vis-a-vis, it's like almost like force majeure, right? It's kind of outside their control.
Yeah.
And they somehow have to have you ever been involved with those kinds of conversations? It's just how do we protect ourselves in the market?
Yeah, it's really tricky. When these initial additional tariffs were imposed in 2018, a lot of US companies did go back to manufacturers in China just to see if they could renegotiate a lower value. That's where I've seen it. But a lot of times the answer was no. So there's not a ton of wiggle room once these are imposed. Of course, there's some solutions and strategies we're going to talk about later, but
Yeah.
for contractual perspective, it's tough. Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious. Sorry for getting you off your.
No, that's great. So yeah, you want to know what you're paying currently. What is your spend, monthly, annually, not only in the US, but globally? Like, what are we spending globally on customs duties? And then what tools do you have to track and report this? Like, are you looking at it? Are you putting it in Excel? Are you visualizing it in some graphs that executives can take in pretty quickly and see what the trends are and how much is being paid? Who owns this data? Who's even receiving it? Is it getting outside of the Trade Department to other groups where it would be helpful to see this type of analysis?
Yeah. Here's the fun part that I always look forward to is, okay, great. You've helped us wrap our head around what we should look at, why we're looking at it, how to understand the magnitude of it, and the degree of risk or opportunity. In this case, mostly risk is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
So what do you do? I mean, give us that sage advice and saying, okay, if you've got that problem, what's the best way to go after getting in front of that and solving it?
Absolutely. So let's go back to our buckets. The first one we were talking about is personnel and trade compliance experts on your team. So if you go walk down the halls and take surveys and you don't have a trade compliance department team or even one expert on staff, now is really the time to be thinking about hiring. These folks are in especially high demand now with all these upcoming tariffs that are going to be imposed. So you really want to make sure that you have someone on your team that you can count on who's an expert who can help you advise in this area and understand what to do. Because the difference between knowing if you're going to have a 40% duty rate or a 5% duty rate is absolutely crucial. So if you find out, okay, we have a trade compliance team or we have a person, like we were talking about before, this is the time you guys really want to get to know each other, become friends. And as we were saying, make sure they have a seat at the table for all of these types of decisions. Ideally, as we were saying, as far upstream as possible. But you want to be starting to bring those folks in on these key strategic decisions and meetings if they are not already on staff. I had this client years ago who they are a global importer and exporter. They are a manufacturer. They actually had one part-time person responsible for global trade at their company, and they didn't even know much about trade. So what happens? U.S. Customs comes knocking on the door for an audit. And this is the position you don't want to be in when you're scrambling and you don't even have a robust department or someone who can even answer these questions from U.S. Customs. So I came in, we helped build up the program. It took a few years to get the expertise, to hire the folks, both on the import side and the export side. And now the program's up to about 10 full-time employees. And they're really driving conversations, decisions across the company. And luckily, they've passed their audits with flying colors. But it's kind of this, I keep going back to, you don't want to get caught flat-footed. You don't want to get that call from customs. You don't want to get a call when an item's at the border and it's subject to all these duties that you had no idea about. So you really want to be integrating these folks into your conversations.
Yeah, you may not know, which was fine, but it just made me think about, the accounting folks, right? They've got a big dog in this fight, and, it would seem like they've got to be building, our estimating system and our forecasting about future profit and loss. Kind of goes back to the sales inventory and operation plan. We've got to plan for future cash flows and all that good stuff. You get involved with those kinds of conversations too?
Absolutely. I mean, especially I spent 10 years working at Ernst& Young. So accounting firm, we're embedded within the international tax function. And sometimes the trade compliance department is within tax because there's a lot of synergy there, especially when we start talking about related party transactions and accounting and tax. It's really hand in hand and they should be working together in the most ideal situations.
All right, awesome. I was guessing it was the case, but I
Yeah.
wasn't sure about that.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Trade is really touches so many different functions at a company. Sometimes it's more visible than not, but legal, accounting, tax, manufacturing, operations, procurement, strategy. It's very multifaceted. So that's what makes it so interesting to me.
Cool.
And then just finally wrapping up on this piece, if you can't hire a trade professional right now, you don't have that budget, you don't have a dedicated team member, think about trying to get someone just on an on-call arrangement. Can you have someone you can call and pick up the phone when you have questions, if you get an inquiry from the government, for example, just so you can kind of start building out that team and resources.
All right, cool. All right, let's continue on then for the next advice section.
Sure. Okay, so mapping out your supply chain, as we talked about, it's so important. So if you don't have that map, you need to start now. Where are goods imported and exported from? Where are they going? Where is the final destination? Sometimes they're imported into the US and they're still going on to Canada, Mexico, on to Europe if they're coming in from Asia, for example. So you want to make sure that you're understanding this very clearly. And also, as you mentioned, from an export perspective. So as you mentioned, we are expecting many countries to be enacting retaliatory tariffs. So in reaction to U.S. tariffs that may be applied, countries may enact their own tariffs on U.S. goods. So if you're a major manufacturer in the U.S., maybe you don't import too much, but you manufacture a lot in the U.S., and then you're exporting to markets in Europe, for example, those walls may be going up as well. There may be retaliatory tariffs. They're already talking about that in Canada, for example, as well. So you want to be thinking about that because your U.S. goods are going to cost a lot more overseas. And that is really going to affect the demand for your U.S. products. So it really needs to be looking both directions. What are we bringing in and what's going out? And be very clear about that to be able to think and plan ahead. Maybe you need to do more exports very soon in the next few months. A lot of U.S. importers right now are importing 2 or 3 times what they maybe did last December to get those goods across the border and into a warehouse now so they can sit there, even if it's for a year, because it's a lot cheaper right now. Just thinking about understanding your supply chain, sometimes folks think it's more straightforward than it is. But years ago, I spent about a month in Russia for a U.S. tech company. They wanted to do an audit of their distributors in Russia. So they were selling their tech goods, hardware into Russia. They wanted to, just understand that the distributors were doing the right thing. So we thought it'd be a fairly simple exercise to sit down with these distributors, understand the financial flow. Okay, who are you importing from? Where are the goods? Are they shipping from this country into Russia? What's happening? And it ended up being one of the most fascinating experiences of my life. From a financial perspective, it was a game of hot potato. No one wanted to be the owner of the goods at the time they crossed the border into Russia because the Russian customs is one of the most corrupt customs agencies. The customs officials in Russia are some of the richest government officials because of all the bribes that are paid.
Yikes.
No one wants to be the official importer or owner of the goods at the time they cross the border. So they were going through shell companies, in the Caribbean. It was wild. From a physical perspective, we met with a distributor in St. Petersburg. And no joke, they told us they are bringing some goods, this is a very well-known company, across the border on sleds from Finland. Literally.
With dogs and everything, right? Dogs and everything?
Yeah, I mean, it was wild. So, you think, that's a big country. This should be somewhat straightforward. This is American goods being brought into Russia, big brand name. And there's a lot of gymnastics going around financially and physically to get these goods across the border. Do you really want to know what's going on in every country? And it can really be fascinating. Yeah. So after you kind of have that good mapping session, hopefully with trade at the table, and many companies are starting to do this now, the forward-looking ones, we need to start thinking about what the alternatives are. What are the strategies here? Are there other manufacturing locations, other countries that have the capabilities to manufacture your same goods? For example, outside of China, are there other countries in Asia? Perhaps. Although we also know that there could be similar tariffs on kind of like China adjacent countries like Vietnam, for example, but that's not immediately on the table. The big focus is China, Mexico, and Canada right now.
I got to interrupt the road really quick here. We've got a partner in India, specializing like we do in interim talent, right? Interim leadership and problem solving talent, people like you. And India is a big market. And is that coming more and more in the conversation? There's a lot of growth going on there. There's lots of infrastructure issues, but one thing they've got some
Yeah,
arms and legs to do stuff for sure.
absolutely.
Is
Yeah.
you see India beginning to be a bigger entry? And is that a real threat or an opportunity, or would it depend?
I think it depends. Yeah. My clients are definitely looking more towards India. Like you said, it can be complicated there, but there's a lot of opportunities for potential manufacturing. And they are not as high on the radar right now in the news in terms of these additional tariffs. So it definitely could be a good opportunity for companies to be looking at.
Okay. Sorry for getting you off track.
Yeah.
It just popped into my head.
Yeah. No, that's a great, I mean, at this point, everyone needs to be really open-minded and creative in terms of like what they're thinking about, especially when you're thinking about 40-60% tariffs. The other question right now, the safest spot to manufacture is going to be the US. Can your company, if you're not manufacturing in the US, can you? And a lot of companies' answer is going to be no, we don't have that infrastructure immediately available. Could it be in the medium term? Potentially. You kind of want to keep that on your radar and really be thinking about what are all the possibilities. Right now, Trump is talking about 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. So that's goods manufactured in Mexico, manufactured in Canada. That's huge. It's even more than the current 10% they're thinking about applying to China. We're not sure how those are all going to land. And of course, there's tons of negotiations already starting with meetings with Canada, Justin Trudeau meeting with Trump, and same with Scheinbaum meeting with Trump for Mexico.
Yeah, let me ask a question here. One of the strategies that China's been actively engaged in is actually starting up businesses in Mexico
Yeah.
to make stuff. And I'd be
Yeah.
curious, is that transparent as it could or should be? And is that part of the reason why the Trump administration is being so aggressive with Mexico to try to stop China from circumventing his aim?
Yeah, partially. And you're right about that trend. Absolutely. I mean, what they've been saying in terms of the news is really for Mexico is to stop the immigration issue and the drugs and fentanyl. That's really the two main points they're talking about when they say this 25% tariff. However, it is very true, too, that there's so much investment in Mexico. There's a lot of parts coming in from China that then get manufactured into a finished good in Mexico that crosses the border into the U.S., may or may not qualify for the free trade agreement that the U.S. has with Mexico. But this is really throwing things into a bit of a chaotic mess with thinking about 25% tariffs on Mexico, given the number of companies that are doing manufacturing operations and trucking goods across the border. It's going to have huge impacts. And then you want to think about duty saving strategies as well, not only for future imports, but like right now. We've talked a little bit about free trade agreements. Are you importing from a country that currently has a free trade agreement with the U.S.? The U.S. has negotiated with dozens of countries free trade agreements. And for goods that qualify, they could come in duty-free into the US. That's 0% duty on these items right now. Once you have that supply chain map, looking and seeing, do we have these connections with these countries right now to take advantage of a free trade agreement? There's also a lot of different mechanisms in the US. For example, I had a client importing goods into China, paying duties in the US, a lot of duties because we have that extra 25% on the China goods, and then sending them to Canada, paying duties again in Canada. That should never happen, to do a double. Yeah, you should never have to pay double duties. So a couple different options. You can bring them into what's called a bonded warehouse in the US that's outside of customs territory. You don't pay any duties when they enter the warehouse. If they're exported to another country, it's as if they were never here. They don't enter customs territory, no duties are paid, for example. You would only pay in Canada or that other country. Even simple things like that, like really looking at the physical flows of your supply chain and saying, wait, this makes no sense. That could be an easy savings. There's also something called foreign trade zones or free trade zones. They exist in a lot of countries. In the US, it's quite robust. If you're doing any manufacturing in the US, you can bring in parts and components, not pay any duty on them, do the manufacturing, produce a finished good, and then pay the duty on the finished good when it leaves. So it's also a cash flow thing. You don't have to pay until the good leaves the zone.
Right.
But the duty rate on the finished good may be lower than the duty rate on the components. So you're saving money there.
Oh, wow. That's one I
Yeah.
never thought of, but that makes
Yeah.
sense.
So yeah, lots of kind of planning opportunities to be thinking about. And this is where you need that trade person to be providing these ideas and working hand in hand with other departments to come up with some of these strategies and see what money could potentially be saved, because every dollar is going to count with these new changes.
All right, cool. Is there more diagnostics you can offer us?
Uh,
I'm sorry. More advice, I should say. I misspoke.
yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit about the duty and the really great tools that are out there right now. So if during your diagnostic, you didn't have a very clear picture of how much duty your company is paying in the US or globally, in the US, Customs and Border Protection provides a free tool to all importers and exporters. So anyone, an authorized personnel at a company, can sign on to, it's called the ACE portal. It stands for the Automated Commercial Environment. Free. You can sign on, put in your importer number, which is like your tax ID, and you can download import reports and export reports. So there's a couple advantages here. You can have all of your data free and visible right away to you. So you can run all those analytics, create those cool charts and graphs and visualize. 2, you're seeing what the US government sees of your activity. So you can see the picture that they see when they're analyzing for risk and compliance, who they're going to come audit, who they're going to send questionnaires to. You have that visibility to see like, ooh, I don't know why we're declaring this country or this good, or I had no idea we were bringing in goods from X country. There can be a lot of surprises that you can see in the data. So it's an amazing tool, and not enough companies are taking advantage of it, and it's free. This is also available globally. So a lot of other countries provide this data, not all around the world, but UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, just to name a couple, Canada, Mexico. You can get this data from the governments. Most of the time it is free or has a nominal fee. So it's very much worth it to start getting that data and really be on top of monitoring what that current spend is. And especially as we go into the next year, being able to look at that and make sure things are right. Because maybe you have the wrong value. Maybe the product has the wrong tariff classification and you don't need to pay that much duty. So that's a tool that I really recommend folks look into immediately.
Awesome. I think we're getting to the bottom of it here. So,
Yes,
as far as
absolutely.
advice goes, wow, this was
Yeah.
jam-packed full of, just got my mind spinning about all the ancillary conversations, that spin off this
Yes.
for organizations. You think about a logical flow diagram, if you think about the supply chain operations reference model and you're looking at, the supply chain usually focus around, where are they located? What's the logistics? where is the value generated? But you have to really dive way deep into duties and tariffs implications. And then, do we already have or do we need those free trade zones, those duty-free locations? Should we be looking at maquiladoras in Mexico?
Yeah.
And blah, blah, blah. This just goes on and on. So this has been fantastic. And Karen, you've opened up a lot of cans here, I think, for the audience. If they'd like to get in touch with you to learn more or pick your brain, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to my website, or my company is Frontera Global Advisory. The website is fronteraga.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Karen, thank you so much for joining me. This was great.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.